Okay, so we'll start with homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning everybody. Okay, today is May 19th, 2012. That's for the benefit of the tape recorder. Not the recorder. Okay, and today we take it's called the Aggivacchagotta Sutta. This is the discourse to Vacchagotta on fire, because it has the fire simile. I've always found this a very difficult sutta, and so we'll just sort of explore it, try to see what it's saying. And this is the second in a series of 3 suttas in the Majjhima Nikāya, which takes the form of a discussion between a wandering ascetic named Vacchagotta and the Buddha. The first one that we took last week, number 71, deals with the question of omniscience, whether the Buddha is omniscient in the sense that he knows everything all the time, whether standing, sitting, lying down, walking. And the Buddha rejects that and says that he is one with the 3 knowledges, 3 higher knowledges: recollection of past lives, the divine eye which sees the arising and passing of beings, and the knowledge of the destruction of defilements. But we also saw that in another sutta, the Buddha denies the possibility of having simultaneous omniscience. And so it seems that the Buddha is not denying the possibility of knowing anything that one wants to know. And so whether the Buddha is omniscient or not, or whether omniscience is a possibility or not, I say it depends upon what one means by omniscience, in the sense of a continuous and simultaneous knowledge of everything. According to the Buddha's text, it's not possible. But other types of omniscience, in the sense of knowing whatever one directs one's mind to in order to know, that is not ruled out. Okay, now this sutta, to Vacchagotta on fire, deals with these questions that were repeatedly being discussed and debated by the various communities of ascetics, Brahmins, philosophers, debaters, meditators, yogis in the Buddha's time. There are 10 such questions, and in this sutta, the wanderer Vacchagotta comes to the Buddha, exchanges greetings with him, and then poses these questions to the Buddha. By the way, there was a handout. It was actually a mailing first, a form of an attachment to the announcement about the class. Did everybody get that? Oh, I see. These were the extra photocopies that were made. I see. So she put them here. Did anybody not get them? You didn't bring them. Okay, then. That's one.
For this class or for the last?
There was one for this class. You didn't get it? Okay. Anybody else need? You need? Because I have my own. Okay, so here the wanderer Vacchagotta comes to the Buddha and starts asking the Buddha he poses these 10 disputed questions. So first he comes and says, how is it, Master Gautama, do you hold the view, the world is eternal, only this is true, anything else is wrong? So the way these questions are usually posed, you can see that there's 2 elements to the question. One is what we might call the content of the question, which is simply asking, in this case, is the world eternal? And then there's usually added a kind of trailer to the question, which shows not so much the content of the question, but how would we characterize this? What is that trailer? What does that signify? Come, somebody. Okay, Richard.
Well, it's the basis for a contentiousness about the view.
Okay, that's a good way to express it, a kind of contentiousness. Maybe any other way of characterizing it?
Well, we tend to, that he's asking him whether or not he is willing to polarize his position against others.
Okay, that's a good way, okay.
Either debate it or exclude them.
Okay, you could say a contentiousness, a polarizing tendency. Any other way to characterize this? Yeah.
It's sort of like the Gretchen frog out of...
The what?
It's like the Gretchen frog of Faust demanding we believe in God or not. It's a show me what you know, or should tell me, lay your cards out.
I'm not catching the sound so well. Do we have that other microphone? Kaide isn't doing her job. Say it again.
I was reminded that it's like Gretchen frog from Faust.
Oh, I
tell
see.
me if you believe in God is her question.
I see.
Do you have religion?
Yeah.
It is going to inspire some kind of provocative
Yeah.
opposition.
But there's another idea that I'm trying to get at. It's already sort of suggested by some of the comments.
It's like indicating that if it's absolute.
Okay, take the microphone.
It's asking if it's absolute.
Yeah, we could say that there's a kind of absoluteness. And there's one word that I'm trying to get at.
Eternalism?
Well, that is part of implied by the content of the view, but this idea that I'm trying to get at is attached to each of the views.
It's solid, trying to finite something, trying to define something.
It's not exactly what I had in mind.
Doubt.
No.
I give up.
Yeah. Okay, the way I would characterize it is, as I said, it's already sort of indicated in some of the answers, what I call like a dogmatic clinging, or tenaciousness as well as contentiousness. Like, only this is true. And that's the tenaciousness or dogmatic clinging. Anything else is false. That's the contentiousness or polarizing tendency. Okay, so then the Buddha answers, I do not hold the view, the world is eternal, only this is true, anything else is wrong. Okay, then Vacchagotta poses the question, the world is not eternal. So here we have the first dichotomy or polarity, or if anybody knows the work of Kant, Immanuel Kant, antinomy, the antinomies of pure reason, sort of the opposition of two views which are diametrically opposed. Two views that are diametrically opposed. Okay, so this is the first pair. The world is eternal, the world is not eternal. Then comes the next pair. The world is finite, only this is true, anything else is wrong. The Buddha says, I do not hold this view, the world is finite, only this is true, anything else is wrong. Then the same thing, the world is infinite. Again, an opposition is rejected. Then comes the view, the soul and the body are the same, only this is true, anything else is wrong. And the soul is one thing, the body is another. Okay, so the Buddha then says, I do not hold any of those views. Okay, then comes a set of 4 views about the condition of what's called a Tathagata. Normally, the word Tathagata signifies, the Buddha uses it in relation to himself as a kind of designation for the Buddha. But it seems here, as we'll see, that it has a wider meaning, so that it can apply to any enlightened person, any fully liberated person. And so it would apply not only to the Buddha as a particular historical individual, but to any, within the Buddha system, any arahant who's fully liberated from birth and death. And so here we have a 4-fold division of the questions. Okay, how is it? Do you hold the view after death a Tathagata exists? Only this is true, anything else is wrong. And the Buddha says, I do not hold this view. How is it? After death, is it the case that the Tathagata does not exist? Only this is true, and so on. Okay, then we have a synthetic view, a syncretic view. After death, the Tathagata both exists and does not exist. Only this is true, anything else is wrong. And then a double negation. How is it? After death, a Tathagata neither exists nor does not exist. Only this is true, anything else is wrong. And then the Buddha rejects this view and says, I do not hold a view. After death, a Tathagata neither exists nor does not exist. Only this is true, anything else is wrong. Okay, so the Buddha is rejecting 4, let's say he's rejecting these 10 speculative views. And it seems like if we look at them logically, it would seem of each of these sets of views that one alternative or the other would have to be right, the other would have to be wrong. If it's not A, then it must be not A. If it's not A, then it must be A. That's simple logic. But why does the Buddha reject all of these views? Richard?
I just wanted to note that, for instance, he does not raise the possibility that the world is both infinite and finite, or neither finite.
Yeah, that's interesting.
He only does it in the case of...
Yeah, that's interesting and a little puzzling, because there are some suttas, I think they come in the Udana, in which the views are the first 2 pairs of, what is here, the first 2 pairs of views are developed in 4 ways. So one does get the alternatives. The world is both eternal and not eternal. The world is neither eternal nor not eternal. And the same thing with finite and infinite.
But this becomes systematic in Majjhima.
Yeah.
Like he always gives you 4 possibilities.
Yeah.
Here it's just in the case of the Vacchagotta. Is it that the existence can have two different meanings for the Vacchagotta after death? Is he introducing this other set of possibilities because he's thinking something along the lines of, say, like you have an Egyptian doctrine that you've got 2, 3, 4 different souls. You know, you've got one that stays on earth and one goes to heaven, something like that. Is he thinking along those lines? And so he's thinking that there's a way, there might be a way for a Vacchagotta to both exist and not exist after death, whereas that would not be true, say, for the eternality of the world or something like that?
I think it's possible that one might even formulate views about the world in that way. I'm trying to remember the Brahmajala Sutta, which I think might have the 4 alternatives regarding the world and regarding the eternity of the world and the finitude or infinity of the world. Definitely there are some suttas that come in the Udana, which Udana is a small book of the Khuddaka Nikāya. Some suttas which have the 4 alternatives regarding the eternity of the world and the infinity of the world.
My guess is that they may have been added later, because here it's you see, the issue's being raised by Vacchagotta.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And he presumably is raising it because it's something that exists in Hindu doctrines. There's some other philosophical doctrine circulating in India at the time that emphasizes, that you can have both and neither nor possibilities for some things.
Yeah.
But then it seems to me that it's Nagarjuna who's first systematic about that.
Yeah.
He wants to say this is true of everything. But when you look at the text, you see that idea is introduced by an outsider. That it's not introduced by the Buddha. It's something the Buddha is denying, but is being introduced by someone who is familiar, who's thinking of other doctrines, and he's applying it solely to the soul. So I'm wondering if that arises because of a doctrine of a multiplicity of souls that circulates.
I see. I think certainly certainly it's the case that the reason why there are 4 alternatives regarding the Tathagata is because there were different speculative views, some of which would have held that there's a way in which the Tathagata exists after death, but at the same time a way that he doesn't exist after death. We'll come to some of those as I go on. But I wouldn't rule out the possibility that there were also the 4 alternatives regarding the world and as being eternal or being finite, infinite. Because there are suttas which do cover those alternatives. I'm not so sure that they're necessarily later.
They might be, but isn't the Buddha denying them when they're brought up? Because I think they're not his ideas.
Oh, no.
And they're ideas that become attributed to him or the people later on think are relevant to his doctrine because he responds to them. Right? But is there a time in these texts when he says he does believe, he does hold the view that something both is and isn't, or that it neither is nor is not? Does he ever say that himself?
Not with regard to the eternity of the world or with regard to the finitude or infinity of the world.
Yeah, I think it's significant because I think that the doctrine, that sort of logic that Nagarjuna develops is not actually in the original Buddhist scriptures. It's added on, it's a formalization of a originally non-Buddhist doctrine.
I don't know, this is beyond my competence. Well, we need like a historian of Indian philosophy who knows the difference.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to do that because, nobody has dates straight. It's incredibly difficult to get...
Yeah, we don't really have records of the teachings of the Buddhas that were circulating in the Buddha's time, except through the Buddha's texts. Even the Jain scriptures are dated to considerably later than the time of Mahavira, the founder of Jainism.
Well, you have things like the Vedas and
yeah.
do you know if there's maybe there's something in one of the Vedas or something like that. They predated by a long way.
Yeah, of course the Vedas are much older, but it seems that positions on these views were held by philosophers in the Buddha's time in the community of the samanas, who were usually outside the fold of Brahmanism. So while some of them, of course, some of these views certainly would have been in accordance with Brahmanism, but the different schools of philosophy and the ascetics in the Buddha's time were generally non-Brahminical.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. That set of alternatives that Nagarjuna always uses is not the Buddha's idea. That he actually uses two value logic. And he believes in the law of the excluded middle.
The Buddha, you're saying the Buddha uses?
He's a very logical guy. It's not like Nagarjuna.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, let us just go on with this, because this is, the question deals. You do have a point there. But the question about what positions were held in the Buddha's time, this I'm not really qualified to say. Let's see where we left off. Okay, now going to paragraph 13. Okay, here then Vacchagotta raises the question. He says, how is it, Master Gotama? When Master Gotama is asked each of these 10 questions, and I have to tell you that this is an abbreviation of the original text. In the Pali, the original text, it says something like, when Master Gotama is asked, is the world eternal? Only this is true, anything else is false? He says, not so. When he is asked, then is the world not eternal? Only this is true, anything else is false? He says, not so. So it goes through all 10 questions again, saying, just repeating that the Buddha says, not so. Okay, so now Vacchagotta raises the question, what danger does Master Gotama see that he does not take up any of these speculative views? Now, it seems to me that this wouldn't be the natural question for somebody to ask. What would be a more natural question? The sort of immediate question that would come to one's mind if the Buddha says, I don't hold any of these views.
That's what is the Buddha's view.
Speak more loudly.
If he denies all those views, then what is his view?
Okay, that's a good, that wasn't what I was thinking of, though that's a good way to put it. But there's another question that I thought sort of naturally occurred to somebody.
I don't think it's obedient, but I wonder, my question was, how is he not being evasive? It's not.
Okay, I mean, that's a possibility too, but what I have in mind is a very simple question that I think would automatically occur to me if I were in a situation like Vacchagotta. Very simple, just the automatic question that would pop into the mind, nothing. Exactly. Why not? Why don't you hold any of these views? So it seems that when the text phrases this, what danger do you see? I have to say, I think this is the work of the editors who want to, of the editors of the text, who want to put this, to get the Buddha to highlight, say, the danger implicit in any of these views, rather than simply to explain why he doesn't hold them. Okay, and so here the Buddha says, okay, Vacca, the speculative view that the world is eternal is, then he uses a series of metaphors, a thicket of views, a wilderness of views, a contortion of views, a vacillation of views, a fetter of views. Okay, this is just using sort of rhetorical metaphors. It doesn't yet really give an explanation. But now comes what we call a more explicit explanation. It is beset by suffering, by vexation, by despair, by fever. This would be like the fever of concern to hold the right view. And it does not lead to disenchantment, dispassion, cessation, peace, direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to nibbana. Okay, and then the same thing is said about each of the other 10 views. So all of them are described as a thicket of views and so on, a fetter of views. They're beset by suffering and so on, and they do not lead to let's say, to enlightenment and to nibbana. Okay, so from this angle, we would say, what is like the orientation that the Buddha is taking to views that explains his reluctance to adopt any of these views?
Because his primary enemy is passion. He's saying all these views are the result of passionate attachment.
Passionate what?
Passionate attachment.
Okay,
So
okay.
they're all things that,
Yeah.
that mislead people. All you're doing is projecting your own desire into the universe. So they prevent you from seeing what the universe is.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good point. Though I had in mind, how would one simply characterize the Buddha's, let's say, orientation or attitude towards the views?
That they lead to suffering. And
Even more generally, it's true, but
The Buddha only teaches suffering and the cessation of suffering.
okay, but I have a very broad general term in mind. You're all right, but something more general, more comprehensive, a simple word or simple phrase that gets the point of the Buddha's rejection of views.
They just bog you down.
In a way, you're on the right track, but I haven't heard the word that I'm...
It's like a distraction from the aim of gaining these.
Again,
Ignorance.
no, not quite what I had in mind.
Clinging.
Not quite what I had in mind. Starts with a P.
Practical.
Say it?
Practical.
Right, exactly. Let's say that holding the views are not practical. Or maybe you could say they're not pragmatic. The Buddha here is taking a pragmatic orientation. That the reason why he's not adopting any of these views here, not propounding them, not accepting them, is because they're not practical. They don't lead, adopting such a view doesn't lead to the goal or end of his teaching. But the interesting question that we're going to explore is the question, is the only reason that the Buddha is rejecting these views a practical reason? Can there be, at a deeper level, what we might call a philosophical reason for not adopting or propounding these views? On the practical level, we see this rejection of views, from a pragmatic point of view, stated very, very clearly in another sutta in the Majjhima Nikāya. This is the shorter discourse to Malankya-Putta, which comes at page 533. This is sutta is very often quoted in books on Buddhism to show the Buddha's practical orientation. In this sutta, there's a monk named Buddha who is sitting in meditation, reflecting, and then he realizes that the Buddha has never given his opinion about any of these 10 views. And so then he thinks, I want the Buddha to give me the answers. So I'm going to go to the Buddha and I'm going to say to him, look, man, you can't be evasive anymore. You're going to have to tell me, is the world eternal? Is it not eternal? Is the world infinite? Not infinite? And so on. And if you don't tell me any of these, if you don't answer any of these questions, then I'm giving up on you. I'm going to leave your teaching and I'll go find another teacher who answers these questions. Okay, so then he goes to the Buddha, he lays down those conditions, and then the Buddha says to him that you are like a man who's been shot by a poisoned arrow, and he's lying on the ground, and then his friends, the man's friends and relatives, call a doctor to come and remove the arrow, and the man who is shot by the arrow says, when the doctor comes, he says, wait a minute, don't start the surgery yet. First, let me know the name of the man who shot me. His first name, his last name, what caste is he from, what kind of material was the bow made out of, what was the material that the arrow was made out of, what kind of string was used, and so on. And then the Buddha says, if a man who's shot by an arrow persists in asking questions like that, what's going to happen to him? He's gone, right? He's going to die from the poison. And so the Buddha says that this teaching that I proclaim doesn't depend on answers to these questions. But what I teach is not whether the world is eternal, not eternal, finite, infinite, and so on. What I teach, the fundamentals of the spiritual life are this is suffering, this is the cause of suffering, this is the cessation of suffering, this is the path to the cessation of suffering. And why don't I answer those other questions? Because this doesn't lead to disenchantment, dispassion, cessation, peace, higher knowledge, enlightenment, nibbana. And why do I teach suffering and the end of suffering? Because that leads to disenchantment, dispassion, cessation, peace, higher knowledge, enlightenment, nibbana. So here again we could see very clearly the reason for not answering the questions is practical. Answers to those questions don't lead to enlightenment, to nibbana. The Four Noble Truths lead to enlightenment, to nibbana. But this leaves, to my mind, maybe I'm a little bit like Buddha. Is it true or false? Is the world eternal or not eternal? And it really seems to me that quite a lot depends on this. Because now, even in modern cosmology, we have divisions between, this is scientific cosmology, between two. Are there any astrophysicists here?
I'm the daughter of one.
You are!
I'm an astrophysicist.
Your father's an astrophysicist?
Yeah, Daddy was here.
Yeah, I don't want to step into put my foot into a mud puddle. But the two basic schools basically say, one school says everything started with the Big Bang. So this is 15 billion years ago, 17 billion years ago. There was this There was nothing else, not even space and time, except just like a little minuscule, they don't actually say what there was, but there took place this gigantic explosion, and then everything came swelling out, and then all matter formed, then gradually as matter formed and stars formed and galaxies started to form, as galaxies took shape, then solar systems formed, and suns formed, then the planets came out of the sun, and so on. And that way we come to the present universe. And so everything starts 17 billion years ago, and before that, well, it's beyond the range of science. But if you take that point of view, then the universe is, in terms of its past, not eternal, but there was a first point. Then the other school, which has just come into being over the last few years, speaks about the cyclic universe. In their view, the universe goes through cycles of expansion, contraction, over and over without any determinable beginning. And so from this point of view, you would say the universe is without a first point in time. And what does the Buddha himself say in other texts?
They come and go. Universes come and go?
Yeah. But a very specific statement that we find again and again. Pretty much that. He says, there's no first anamatago yang bhikkhave samsara. This samsara, the cycle of birth and death, is without a discoverable beginning. No first point can be perceived of sentient beings roaming and wandering from one life to the next. So if samsara is without first beginning, and there's no first point of beings passing away and re-arising, it seems to imply that the Buddha really does have an answer to that. Doesn't it?
But he's saying perceivable.
That's an interesting
He's not
qualification.
saying there isn't one, they're saying there's no way we can find one.
That's an interesting point. Because he always then brings it within the range of perception. And then the Buddha, he says that he is able to recollect his past lives as far as he wants. So he can go back maybe 20 billion world cycles, but what about the 21st? Well, maybe he goes back 30 billion, but if there's an infinite number, it seems even if you go back a billion, then there'll be still world cycles earlier than that. And so it would seem logically that one can never determine 100% with 100% certainty whether or not there was a beginning.
In the last sutta, he says he's omnipotent.
He never says omnipotent. You mean omniscient? He doesn't say omniscient. That's what he rejects. But he says. He says at the end of the last sutta, 589, he says, "When I recollect the past 91 aeons." So here he's speaking about 91 aeons. But certainly he'll be able to recollect, he says many aeons of world expansion and contraction. And 91 doesn't seem like such a great number. So certainly the Buddha would have been able to, I would assume, to recollect many, many more than 91. Yeah. So it seems like in theory, maybe there is a way to answer these questions. But I think that all of these questions I don't know, actually. But there are some other texts in which the Buddha refuses to answer these questions. Let us just continue with the Vacchagotta Sutta. Okay, here, let's say he's holding to this practical orientation. And so the reason why he doesn't adopt any of these positions is because to adopt them is to entangle oneself further in suffering, and because the answer to these questions don't lead to enlightenment and liberation. Okay, now, paragraph 15, Vacchagotta poses another question. Now he says, does Master Gotama hold any speculative view at all? And here the word that's translated speculative view is Vacchagotta. Yet the word ditti, translated as view, comes from the verbal root das, which means to see. And then the suffix gatta, just literally it means gone to, but it doesn't really have a special significance here. So it's just some kind of view that one adopts is a Vacchagotta. So it's translated speculative view. And so the Buddha here says speculative view is something that the Tathagata has put away. And then he gives the reason why he has rejected these speculative views. And here comes the important point. He says, for the Tathagata, that's himself, has seen this. And the word translated seen is ditta. So ditti and ditta both come from the same verb, which means to see, dasati. And so ditti is a view, something, an opinion that one holds, just like the English word view. A view is something one hasn't actually seen, but it's an opinion. And in contrast with the view with ditti is what one has actually seen, what is ditta. And what is ditta is this. The Tathagata, the Buddha, has seen such is material form, such its origin or its arising, such its disappearance, then such is feeling, such its origin, such its disappearance, such is perception, such its origin, such its disappearance, such are formations or volitional formations, such their origin, such their disappearance, such is consciousness, such its origin, such its disappearance. Okay, so what is it that the Buddha has seen with direct vision, with insight, with wisdom? How would we express this very concisely?
The five aggregates,
Yeah.
the arising and passing away.
Right, exactly. So the five things mentioned here are the five aggregates. So those are the five aggregates that constitute a living being or sentient being. And he's seen their origin, their arising, and their disappearance, their passing away. And to see the origin and the disappearance or passing away of the five aggregates, there are 2 points of view, or there's the word view again, 2 perspectives, also related to the same idea, on seeing or understanding the arising and passing away of the five aggregates. One is seeing origin and passing away from the standpoint of the conditions. That is, the five aggregates arise and pass away through conditions. And so we have some suttas which speak about the arising, the origin, or the arising of the five aggregates through their conditions. For example, I think this is dealt with in Majjhima Nikāya 109. Yeah, in paragraph 9, this is page 888. It speaks about the causes and conditions for the manifestation of each of the five aggregates. Okay, so the cause and condition for the manifestation, does everybody have that page? The cause and condition for the manifestation of the aggregate of material form is the four great elements. The four great elements are the earth element, water element, fire element, and air element. And so it's when these four elements come together and function together that the aggregate of material form appears. In fact, the primary constituents of the aggregate of material form are the four great elements. And so all other types of material phenomena arise from this interplay of the four primary elements. And some other suttas speak about the origin of material form, I think with specific reference to the body, the living body, to be food in order for the fertilized ovum in the mother's womb to develop into a fetus, into a body. It has to absorb food or nutriment from the mother. And then once we come out into the world, this aggregate of form exists in dependence constantly upon the intake of food, of nutriment. Without nutriment, what happens to the body? If you go for about 3-4 days without eating,
The emaciated Buddha.
that's after months of fasting. But the form starts to diminish. Okay, then the cause and condition for the manifestation of the feeling aggregate, the perception aggregate, the aggregate of volitional formations is the same, it's contact. So it's when, for example, the eye comes into contact with a visible form, then consciousness is actually consciousness which makes contact with a visible form through the eye, and through that contact there arises feeling, perception, and volitional activities in relation to that form. If I hear a sound with the ear, then what's happening is that consciousness is, in a sense, reaching out through the ear, contacting that sound, and then through that contact there arises feeling, perception, and volitional activities regarding the sound. Yep.
Why does it feel like when that aggregate comes back up, that hearing is actually just a form, and that consciousness seems to be the last thing that arrives, adding that kind of a big...
You would use the microphone then.
Why does it seem that when that aggregate comes back on, let's say visual contact, it has almost no taste to it? It has almost, and it's not until consciousness, this last piece of the aggregate comes back, that there's almost an addictive contact added. In other words, I'm saying, I don't think, when I look at the suite of how the aggregates are laid out.
What do you look at? What?
When I look at how the aggregates are laid out as these reignitions that comes back online, and then I look at the actual experience of that, when that first contact first begins, it does not seem like anything's coming through and forming addictive contact. Yeah. It seems just like a very neutral, and then it's not until later that consciousness clicks on and adds almost an addictive specialness.
Okay, I think I understand what you mean. This is quite, if I understand what you mean, it's quite an interesting phenomenon. Yeah. Because you might notice that sometimes something interesting comes in the field of vision, but one hasn't really attended to it yet, and somehow that particular, say, a form comes within the field of vision, somehow the attention turns to it. And it turns out that particular form is the interesting. And yet the contact itself, the initial contact, initial impression, didn't seem any different from the hundreds of other impressions that are taking place one after another. Is that what you have in mind?
Yes, I think that's
okay.
A Cartesian example of that. Okay. And exactly as it is without the slowing down process of suddenly...
It seems, this is my conjecture, this is not something based on the Buddha's text, but it seems that the brain has a way of processing sensory inputs very quickly below the threshold of clear, distinct consciousness, and so it can somehow single out particular interesting stimuli even before they've entered into the range of clear, distinct cognition. And so that is what turns the attention to that particular object that's come into range. That's my conjecture, but I'm not a neuro. Yeah, please.
I would actually see it in a different context, like in Paticcasamuppada, it's like that. Like Vedana, Paccaya, Tanha, Paccaya, Upadana. In the context of Paticcasamuppada, Vedana pacha.
Maybe take the microphone and start again.
So I would actually see it in the context of paticca like Vedana, Pacha, Tanha, Tanha, Pacha, Upadana. So in the first contact, you actually have a subtle Tanha, which is craving. Afterwards, it actually turns into Upadana. Upadana is the true grasping. So at that point, you really start going back and back to the same feeling.
Yeah, that is true, but I think the phenomenon that Katie is speaking about is that where one doesn't yet have a clear cognition of the object, just a very, maybe call it very primitive impression. Very, very elementary impression comes, but somehow the attention turns to, out of 100 impressions taking place almost simultaneously, even before there's a clear cognition, somehow the attention just turns to that which is the one that's going to provoke the craving and the clinging.
It doesn't seem like at that state there's anything there that can experience craving. But then something comes online, and I go, is that called consciousness? The last thing that adds, or the last layer of aggregate is called?
Well,
volitional is the one that feels like volitional layer.
Yeah, the volitional is a kind of response to the sense object. But we should understand that the aggregates are not occurring in a temporal sequence. All five of them are present simultaneously, even though on particular occasions, one aggregate rather than another would be more prominent. So, on an occasion, say, where I'm experiencing intense pleasure or intense pain, then the feeling aggregate is more prominent. But at that time, there's also some perception, some volitional response. On the occasion when I'm selecting something, looking for something, perceiving something, then the aggregate of perception is more prominent. When I've decided to take some action, then the aggregate of volitional activities or volitional formations is more prominent.
Maurice Merleau-Ponty has an analysis.
Okay, please take the microphone. Take the microphone.
Maurice Merleau-Ponty has an analysis of this in the phenomenology of perception. And also Alexander Fender, P-F-A-N-D-E-R with Luna, German, has an analysis in the phenomenology of willing. In Fender's analysis, there are six. He analyzes that perception sequence towards a decision as a sequence of 6 steps in which there's first. Say he uses the example of opening a refrigerator, deciding whether or not you want to eat something in it. And for the first perception, he interprets as a question. What's in there? That is, there's an openness first that reaches out to decide whether, that is to see whether there's information that will come from the environment. Then there's the perception. The second step is the perception of something that's in the environment. Then there is a passionate response to that. The third step is a step of where grasping arises. Okay? And the fourth step is the revelation of the particular thing from the environment to you that is appealing or not. So he starts with the idea that you first have a question. That your being towards something is in the form of a question. Okay? And that then it responds because you've asked that question, you've opened yourself to it. And the passion, the grasping part arises at the second step, or excuse me, the third step, which is your second question, right? And then willing arises.
The second question is, do I want this or not? Is that
Well, is there something that's wantable?
Yeah.
This kind of thing. This is the second question, and then the third question is, am I going to decide to do that? That is, am I going to will? That's the step of formation. That is, the formations of consciousness. That's the fifth step, and then you decided you are at that point fully conscious of it. You're making a mental formation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Okay, that's. I mean, I have to really reflect on that to be able to comment on it. But it seems like quite a minute analysis of the different steps that unfold in sequence in an experience of taking possession of something.
It takes him, as he does this very carefully.
Yeah.
It takes him about 25 pages to do that analysis.
Yeah.
It does take a lot of. It takes a lot of concentration. There's a lot of detail to it.
Yes, similar idea. What you expressed wasn't conjecture on your part at all. You don't have to go to neuropsychology.
Yeah.
The perceptual psychologists have certainly examined this, and I've noticed for years the parallel between phenomenological psychology and Buddhism, and I have no idea where that comes from, but it's so close. Gnostic perception, GNOSTIC, is part of a theory developed by someone who worked like Merleau-Ponty. That's exactly what you described, precisely. But they don't talk about Buddhism. So I don't know the history of that. Yeah.
I mean, I haven't read phenomenology in many years. Let's take Treya.
The one difference between all these philosophies, and this is just in my view, in Buddhism, is that they all get lost in all these discussions about all this stuff and all the phenomenology and how does it work and this, that, and the other. This is why I hate Abhidhamma. And it doesn't get down to the end of suffering. That's why I'm a Suttist, not an Abhidhammaist, because you can go on and on and on.
Okay. Let us just take one, I think Barbara had one comment, then I have to get back to the text.
I was just going to refer to...
Take the microphone, please.
I was just going to refer to the analysis of the 12 links of dependent origination, which I'm working on knowing. And really, it is a step-by-step. The clinging is way, contact is in one place, and clinging requires several other steps.
Yeah, don't forget that they can take place very, very quickly, very quick succession.
Yes.
Those are sequential, but there's a very quick succession of them.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that the contact has to wait, 5-10 minutes, but it's all going on in a split second. Okay, I want to get back now to the condition. Okay, we have the condition for the arising of feeling, perception, volitional activities as contact. Then we have the condition for consciousness. Here, the cause and condition. Oops, I lost the place. The cause and condition for the manifestation of the consciousness aggregate is said to be, here it's translated mentality, materiality. This is, in Pali, what's called nama rupa, sometimes translated name and form. Well, I'm not writing these. But it's name and form. Here would be form, of course, is the material body as well as a material object, and what's called nama, name or mentality, are basically a set of mental factors: feeling, perception, volition. Okay, feeling, perception, volition, the main ones. And so consciousness depends upon, we could say, all four of the other aggregates for its manifestation. So there's no consciousness appearing without a basis in material form, the body, and without being associated with some feeling, perception, and volitional activity. So even when very elementary sense impression that takes place, even though there might not be a very clear, distinct cognition of it, but there's some consciousness, some flash of awareness taking place. Otherwise, without that consciousness, there could be no impression. Okay, now coming back to the Vacchagotta Suttas. Okay, so the Buddha has comprehended the origin of the 5 aggregates and their passing away in terms of their conditions. Then the second way is what I call as actual events. And this is what takes place with the development of insight, sort of momentary insight where one sees from moment to moment the arising and passing away of the 5 aggregates. As the mindfulness and clear comprehension become focused on one's experience from continuing through time, one comes to see how each of the 5 aggregates is constantly arising and passing away. What we call the body is a sort of collection of material phenomena, always arising and passing. And what we call the mind is a collection of the feelings, perceptions, volitions, and consciousness, all of them constantly arising and passing away. Okay, so the Buddha says that he has seen the origin, the disappearance. The disappearance also occurs through conditions. So he's seen, this is what he has seen, and therefore he says, with the destruction, fading away, cessation, giving up and relinquishing of all conceivings, all excogitations, all I-making, mind-making, and the underlying tendency to conceit, the Tathagata is liberated through not clinging. Okay, so we have here a kind of sequence. First comes what the Buddha, the Tathagata, or any enlightened one has seen, is the nature of the 5 aggregates, their origination and passing away. Then therefore, that is, as a consequence of that insight, there comes the, let's put it simple, the giving up and relinquishing of all, I want to use the Pali word, manyita, very important word. Manyita is what's translated conceiving. Okay, so through his insight into the nature of the 5 aggregates, the Tathagata has given up all conceivings. What's called conceivings would be maybe better translated as misconceivings, erroneous concepts, distorted ways of thinking. And then these, we could say, are conveyed by these terms. I've just selected a few terms. I-making, mind-making, and the underlying tendency to conceit. Actually, it should come ahankara. I-making is ahankara, which literally it means making the I. So the idea of an I, in the sense of what I am, that is something that's conceptually constructed on the basis of the five aggregates. So we have the actuality is this arising and passing away of the five aggregates. And then normally because of ignorance, it takes place misconceiving on the basis of the five aggregates. And through that misconceiving, we construct the idea of I, of what I am, my essence. And then there takes place mamankara. Mamankara is mind-making. So we create the idea of what is mine. So we have this duality of I and mine. I sometimes express these two ideas by saying that the I-making is identification. We identify with one or another of the five aggregates and we say, this I am. So we create the sense of what I am through a distorted, erroneous identification with one or another or a combination of the five aggregates. And then there takes place mind-making, where we project the idea of mine outwardly. Well, first inwardly we say, this body is mine, these feelings are mine, and so on. And then we project it outwardly and say, those things are mine. And we inwardly or subjectively, we take possession of them. This is my recorder, get your hands off it. My clock. Okay, so then the Buddha continues, the underlying tendency to conceit. And so we judge ourselves to be superior, inferior. On the basis of that idea, I am, then we judge ourselves through conceit to be superior, to be equal, to be inferior. They're just three different modes of conceit. And so the Tathagata, the Buddha, has given up all I-making, mind-making, and the tendency to conceit. And so he's liberated through not clinging. And so here the Buddha shows that instead of holding to any of those views, the 10 views, which obstruct higher knowledge, enlightenment, nibbana, the Buddha instead focuses attention on understanding the nature of the five aggregates. Through that understanding, giving up I-making, mind-making, and conceit, and thereby becoming liberated from all clinging. Okay, any questions, comments on this part?
Excuse me, what paragraph is this?
I'm in paragraph 15. Okay, then we'll stop here for today. We could have a little discussion after lunch, maybe about 12:10 or so. And then next week we will take the rest of the sutta. Finish it next week. Okay, so then we'll end with the sharing of the merits. And by the way, I put the sharing of the merits file or document, we put it up on the BOW's website under the information about my course schedule. So those of you who come regularly could print it out and then you even memorize the chants. Very simple. And then you could bring them, if you can't memorize, then you could bring them each week. Okay, and then also the meditation instructions I gave last week, those are also put up on the website under, again, in the same place, so you can get that information. Okay, so we end by sharing the merits with the Devas, the Bhutas, the fierce spirits, the Nagas, wishing them to protect the Buddha's teaching, to protect ourselves and others, and to protect the world. Akasata chabumata adeva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva Chirang rakantu sasana Akasata chabumata Deva naga mahedika Punyantang anumoditva Chirang rakantu desana Akasata chabumata Deva naga mahedika Punyantang anumoditva Chirang rakantu mang param Etavatacham hehi sampadam punya sampadam sabbe devanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya Etavatacham hehi sampadam punya sampadam sabbe bhutanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya Etavatacham hehi sampadam punya sampadam Sabbe sadanumodantu Sabba sampati siddhya Bhavabupadaya vijetato Etantare satakayupapanna Rupya rupicha asanya sanino Tukha pamuchantu Pusantu nibuddhing Right.